Yeah, I got to agree. That's not a question as much as a comment. But Lisa says, sharing, no, so many who are simply clueless on how our immune system really functions. They would rather believe the hype on TV. Thank you. You're welcome, Lisa. Thank you for being appreciative of the message. But that's the reality, is that most people, they really don't have a clue. Your immune system is dependent on nutrients. That's where it gets its energy. That's where it gets its strength. The worse your diet, the worse your behaviors, the worse your immune system's going to function. So everybody who's running around scared to death, it's generally those individuals who don't eat well, and they have comorbidities like being diabetic or being overweight or having high blood pressure, because they don't take care of themselves. And so then they want to manifest that everyone else should have to mask and go close the door and be locked inside their home for the next year, 2 years. It started out as 2 weeks, and now here we are into it, almost a solid year. And so in essence, the people with the comorbidities that don't take care of themselves want you to protect them from getting sick, when in actuality, it's them that should be doing things like vitamin D. It's them that should be doing things like exercise and sunshine and quality sleep and quality food if they really want to protect themselves. Remember, it's no one's job in this world to protect you other than you. It's up to you as an individual to make good decisions about your health, to give your body the best advantage it can have, and that's all any of us could ask for. Can an ultrasound of the liver show how much damage your fatty liver is? An ultrasound can give you a general idea, and again, it depends. I mean, the doctor will do the ultrasound, and then they'll read the image, and so they can kind of get a good idea for how much damage is there. But ultrasound all by itself, I would say you probably want to get an ultrasound, but you probably also want to have blood work done, to corroborate what your ultrasound is saying with your liver enzyme values. And that, there's many different things that can be measured. There's ALT, there's AST, there's something called bilirubin that can also be measured. It's a byproduct of liver, elevations are a byproduct of potential liver problems or liver issues. So what causes vitamin D levels to be high even without supplements or vitamin D foods? It depends. I mean, I would say, what is your definition of high? And then maybe I could answer that question a little bit better. Let's see. So somebody's asking about my opinion on using high-dose vitamin D while monitoring calcium levels to treat autoimmune disease. I would say, by itself, it's going to have probably a mediocre effect. Don't get me wrong. There are some people with vitamin D deficiency, and that vitamin D deficiency is playing a major role in the development and the cause of their autoimmunity. But there are multiple causes of autoimmunity, and it's very, very rare that a person who develops autoimmune disease develops that disease as a result of only one single cause. In essence, we're not going to tend to see vitamin D deficiency in a vacuum all by itself causing somebody's autoimmunity. There may be a vitamin D deficiency and also a zinc deficiency and a gluten sensitivity and a food allergen or a toxic exposure to mold or whatever it might be for that particular individual. But vitamin D deficiency or vitamin D hypertherapy all by itself is probably not going to solve the world's autoimmune problems. Although many people with autoimmune disease do have vitamin D deficiency, again, they have other issues that are also contributing. Remember, most people that actually have a vitamin D deficiency, it's because they're hyperinflamed. And so when you take somebody who's hyperinflamed and you treat them with vitamin D to help them symptomatically, you're really using vitamin D more as a drug than you are as a nutrient. And so to me, we don't want to cover the symptoms of autoimmune disease by giving high-dose therapy of vitamin D as the sole reason to overcome autoimmunity. We want to identify the behaviors that a person is embarking on, whether it's diet or lifestyle, etc. Those behaviors that are contributing to their loss or lack of function that's leading up to their autoimmunity. Do you think high dose of vitamin D can cause vitamin D resistance? No, there's no such thing as vitamin D resistance. Let's see here. I have chronic nasal and sinus inflammation. I've been gluten-free for 15 years. ENT's recommendation back then, no wheat, citrus, chocolate, wine, or fermented foods. I take no meds, vitamin D level okay. That's good. Thanks for sharing, Lynn. How much vitamin D for a healthy 8-year-old? The same applies. It's 1,000 units per pound of body weight if you're going to do let's just say a loading round of vitamin D for cold and flu season, which again, this is something that is, as long as you didn't fit the criteria that I described, the high calcium criteria, to me, everybody should do this therapy before cold and flu season. I give credit to this therapy for keeping me healthy for years. I generally don't get sick. Knock on wood, as I say that. Hopefully I'm not the next one that goes down. Nobody can predict the future. However, not only do I see this work in my own personal life and my own family, but I also see this therapy work in all the clients that come to see me and have been for the last several decades. So this has been around a long time, and it's a very, very effective way to give your immune system the strength it needs to get through cold and flu season. Let's see. Let's scroll down just a little bit there. What about K2, MK7 for processing of vitamin D3? Isn't that important? If you're doing something like this, Joe, not necessarily. I mean, you don't have to take K with D. It's kind of something circulating around right now in the internet circles of health and wellness. My experience is no, you don't have to take K with D. Now, can you take K with D? Yes, you can. Does K help with D? Yes, it can. The fact of the matter is, and I do testing, I've tested thousands and thousands of people over the last 20 years, and here's what I see. Most people are not deficient in vitamin K2, but most are deficient in vitamin D3. So there, in my experience at least, there's a limited benefit to having everybody take K plus D when the vast majority I've seen are not deficient in the K, but they are deficient in the D. So I would say yes, if you're deficient in K and D, take them together for sure. But again, my experience is that most people are not K2 deficient, and I actually test K1 and K2 in individuals. So that's just my experience. I can share that with you, but it's not necessary to take them together if you're doing this therapy. Does the microbiome play a role in this? It sure does. Your microbiome is a major asset to your immune system. It's a part of your immune system. Remember, in your gut, there's as we look at your gut, okay, and we're going to draw a crude drawing here, but if this is your gut, these are the gut cells. And on the surface of those cells, you have this mucus layer. And in that mucus, you have all these bacteria that live in that mucus, okay? And so these bacteria, your microbiome, if you will, as many are referring to it, that you're outnumbered approximately 10 to 1. You have 10 times more bacterial cells living in and on you than you have human cells. And these bacteria are very, very important. What we're learning is that people that take antibiotics early in life have a greater tendency toward developing autoimmune disease. One of the reasons why is they're annihilating their microbiome, okay? But what happens is these little bacteria, there's a set of tonsils behind your gut wall called the GALT. That stands for gastro-associated lymphoid tissue. And this represents, depending on the researchers, anywhere between 70 and 80% of your immune system is focused and concentrated behind the gut wall. Again, this is like a set of tonsils that wraps around your small intestine. And the bacteria send messages to the GALT, and the GALT sends messages to the bacteria. They talk to each other. There's a name for this in research. It's called immune crosstalk. And what they talk about is the contents of your gut, what's in here. Now remember, a lot of the ways people get viral exposure is through what they eat, right? So if you ate a virus, there are enteroviruses, right? Gut bugs, if you will. It can colonize your gut, and these immune cross-talking communications, the bacteria sees it, recognizes it, can send a message to the GALT. The GALT can then say, oh, there's a virus in your gut, let's start ramping up immune power to make sure we meet and match that risk or that developing issue that's happening. So there's this immune crosstalk that occurs in your gut through your healthy bacteria. So your good bacteria are critical, your microbiome critical for your immune function. So those of you who've been on antibiotics this year and you didn't take probiotics, after you were done with your round of antibiotics, now's the time possibly to maybe consider supplementing. My favorite way to do that is mega high. I shouldn't say mega because it's not really mega. It's just mega compared to what you can buy over the counter. Like you go to the grocery store and you look for probiotics. Most of them are like 10 billion or 20 billion colony forming units. And you really, if you're going to take high dose probiotics, you're not going to do much post antibiotic if you're not getting at least 200 billion CFU. This is the CFUs. That stands for colony forming units. It's the dose of, that's listed on labels of probiotic supplements. So, if you've just taken an antibiotic, if you're trying to repopulate or help your gut post antibiotic, you've got to get something 200 billion plus as an ideal. Most of your over the counter probiotics are 10 billion, 20 billion, 50 billion is some of the higher range. I'm talking about 200 billion. We have a formula called Ultrabiotic Defense. If that's you, that's something you'd want to do for at least 2 weeks post antibiotic to try to repopulate your GI tract and support your GI tract's microbiome. Francis is asking about one of her clients got sick, nauseous when taking vitamin D. My thought would be, Francis, when somebody gets nauseous taking vitamin D, look at the preparation itself. Some of these preparations have other fillers in them, other ingredients. So depending on the product itself, one of my emulsions is in sesame oil. And there are sometimes people, when I test them, are reactive to sesame. So that particular product's not one that I would want to give that individual. So it's very possible that there may be an inert filler or reagent in your supplement that particular individual reacted to. Should a person take D3 during a fast? Not necessarily should you, but you could. I'd say if you're fasting and your vitamin D levels are healthy, you may not need more vitamin D, but you don't necessarily have to take it because you're fasting. Remember, your primary source of vitamin D is not your diet as much as it is the sunshine. So fasting would have, in my opinion, less of an effect on it overall. Let's see here. Yeah, so an ALT level at 78 is elevated. That's too high. That's a liver enzyme elevation. So fundamentally, Robert, you'd want to figure out why that was happening. Bilirubin at 0.3, not high. So bilirubin okay, but ALT elevated. Recommendation for sinus congestion. Doctor's only solution is nasal steroids. I have osteoporosis, so not doing that. Good call, Lynn. One of the best things that you can do if you've got sinus congestion, if it's chronic, is get checked for food sensitivity, because a lot of times what you eat can actually create that sinus congestion. I see this all the time in people with gluten sensitivity. I also see it in people that have other allergens or reactivity. Dairy is another common one that can cause a lot of sinus congestion. Now, if you're following the no grain, no pain diet already and you're dairy and grain free, you might ask your doc to run some additional allergy testing to see if there's not something else that you could be reactive to. But secondly, you might also look into using a neti pot. Neti pots are fantastic. They are basically, they're saline water that you run up into your sinuses, and what it does is it helps to break down that mucus in the sinus so that you can drain it out naturally. That's probably one of the most natural things that you can do for chronic sinus issue. Now, another thing that can be taken is something called NAC, N-A-C, N-acetylcysteine. And we've got a product called Ultra NAC, which is pure N-acetylcysteine. And that can sometimes, for many people, be very effective as well with chronic sinus congestion. Now, additionally, I have another product called Ultra Sinus Support. And one of the ingredients in that product is NAC, but there are some other things that help support sinus drainage in that product as well that you might consider taking if you're struggling and seeing if that's helpful. But a neti pot would be, one of the natural things that you could do without having to take anything that might be effective for you. So VK is saying, so load for 3 days, but how much vitamin D daily on a maintenance schedule? Well, if we're talking about the middle of winter, it's not a bad idea to get about 5,000 to 6,000 units a day to maintain your level through the winter, depending on your other factors. I find that when people load, if they're healthy, they don't need to take maintenance vitamin D if they're healthy, right? So if you're a healthy individual, you don't have any major problems, you do the load of the vitamin D, you shouldn't need to continue to take a daily maintenance dose indefinitely. But if you're struggling with some type of autoimmunity or some type of chronic inflammatory problem, the best thing to do is ask your doctor to measure your level after doing a vitamin D round, and then measure it again maybe a couple of months later to see how long it took for it to start to decline. That'll give you the best, because it's unique for everyone, but it's relatively safe to do a 5,000 to 6,000 IU per day maintenance dose. Again, if you've got a healthy kidney and normal serum calcium levels. Yeah, so Jen says, I got my vitamin D level checked and it was 32 nanograms per milliliter. That's low. I know your doctor considered it healthy. That's because they're considering this range. You have to understand that most lab tests aren't looking at really healthy ranges. Most lab tests use the range 20 to 100 as norm. My experience is that 50 to 100 is kind of more of an optimal if you're healthy, and 70 to 100 is optimal to maintain if you have autoimmune problems. So if you're overcoming an autoimmune problem, more vitamin D is necessary. If you just want to shoot for optimal levels, you want to be between 50 and 100. There's a little bit of playroom there. But if you're down in that 30 range, 32, that's low. You're cutting it close. Some labs don't report 20 to 100 as a normal range. Some labs report 30 to 100 as a normal range. So you can see the problem with most doctors that run these types of tests is they don't know anything about nutrition. They don't read the nutritional science or the research. They really, honestly, in my opinion, shouldn't even be running the lab test because they're not qualified to really talk about it. Yes, they're qualified by the state medical boards that they practice in, but that's see, I understand in medicine there's a carte blanche. Medical doctors have a carte blanche to be able to do anything on the human body, including run lab tests around nutrition, even though they don't have adequate training in nutrition. I don't want to say all of them. I'm just going to say most of them. Because there are some great medical doctors who practice nutritional medicine very, very well. It's just that your average doc doesn't. They get less than 7 hours of training in school. And that training is typically anti-nutrient training, not pro-nutrient training. Let's see. Scroll down on that other feed and let me look at, and there we go. So back up just a fuzz. So Rachel's asking, she says her son, who is 14, has epilepsy, gravitates toward foods that are high in vitamin D, eats either sardines, mackerel, salmon, etc. every day. Is there such thing as eating too much fish? Yeah, there can be. One of the risks with fish is mercury. Mercury levels can be high if he's eating massive quantities. The thing that you could do, though, ask his doctor to measure his mercury level periodically and just make sure he's not pushing that threshold too aggressively. And there are different tests to measure mercury. You can measure mercury inside the red blood cells. That for a 14-year-old might be a good way to do it. You can also do what's called a post-provocation urine test to measure mercury output in the urine, and sometimes that can be an indicator that a person's getting too much exposure. So those are things that you can, again, ask your doctor to run. Is there a best form of vitamin D, Kelly wants to know. My favorite is cholecalciferol, vitamin D3. Cholecalciferol, also known as vitamin D3. Now, there are prescription ergocalciferol. So you might see some doctors, when they write a prescription, they'll make it for something called ergocalciferol, which is vitamin D2. I don't like using vitamin D2. I don't like it anywhere near as much as this. So I would say if you're buying it over the counter, cholecalciferol vitamin D3 would be your best bioactive option, over the counter. Okay, let's see here. So Ricky's asking, vitamin D 50,000 once a week or more. Here's the thing, if your vitamin D is low and you take 50,000 per week, and you're in this 20 to 30 range, you're not going to get it up. It's not going to get it up. 50K a week won't do it. It's not enough. My experience is you got to hit at least a minimum of 70K a week, and it's best not to do it in 50K in a once a week dose. It's best to get it split out on a daily basis. So if you're trying to build levels of D, if you take it all at once, only one day in the week, it's not as effective, in my experience, as doing it a daily dose. Okay, so taking, in my experience, if you're really trying to get it up from low, you've got to go 10K a day, 10,000 units a day, in the best form of vitamin D. We mentioned earlier cholecalciferol vitamin D, but you'll notice something in the different formulations that I have on Gluten Free Society, they're emulsified. What does that mean? That means they're surrounded by ingredients that make them absorbable. Vitamin D is a fat, and so we pre-emulsify it so that if you have a gallbladder problem or if you have a problem absorbing fat, remember most people with gluten sensitivity have gastrointestinal digestion problems and they have problems with fat absorption. Vitamin D is a fat. So if you really want to absorb it well, if you take it in an emulsified form, you're going to absorb that, whether your gallbladder is missing, whether you have a broken gallbladder, or whether you have a history of celiac disease or gluten sensitivity. So it's going to get into your cells much more effectively than those non-emulsified versions of vitamin D. So again, part of the reason why we have it. So when you're looking for quality, you want to look for emulsified versions of, in my opinion, cholecalciferol. And if you're trying to correct it from that low 20 below, you're not going to do much with that, especially if you're struggling with chronic inflammation. You're not going to touch it with anything less than 10,000 units a day. It just won't go up. So Linda chimed in that her level was 83, or D level was 83, and her doctor thought it was too high. It's not. Very simply put, that's not too high. I can't speak for your doctor or on behalf of your doctor, but what I can say is if they think it's too high, it's because they don't know enough about the science and chemistry of vitamin D. Can your level of vitamin D be too high? Yeah, you can get it too high. But here's the thing, if you were to go out and get a really strong day of sunshine, you could also get your vitamin D in that upper range pretty quick. It's just that most people don't, they don't get sunshine. They don't appreciate the value of a good day of sunshine, or they're scared of the sun because we have this dogmatic paradigm in our country that, somehow not going outside is going to protect you from skin cancer, or that, locking down and locking everybody inside their house for fear of a virus, what you're really doing is you're causing mass scale vitamin D deficiency, mass scale stress, mass scale business closures, which lead to mass scale depression, right? Which lead to suicide, alcoholism, spousal abuse, and a variety of other problems. I think if we look at this whole paradigm, there's this old saying, when the treatment is worse than the cure, we got a problem. And I think that the treatment, many of these, we'll just say, I'll call them non-scientific politicians, because they really don't know what they're doing. They're the blind leading, in this case, unfortunately, the blind leading the blind, and the scared, is they're recommending a treatment to stop an illness, which is actually causing more of the illness and more illnesses along the way. Anyway, I'm gonna quit harping on that. How often can you do a vitamin D regimen? You can do it several times a year, Daphne. It's very safe to do. I actually do it 2 to 3 times a year. I like to do it in September at the beginning of the school year. I like to do it again sometime around that December month before family comes to stay during the holiday season, or before you go and visit family, because it's that, that mixture of germs and airplanes and travel and all that kind of stuff. And then I like to do it again on the tail end of winter. So that, depending on where you're located, for me, that tail end of winter is March. Some of you may have longer winters, and that may be a little bit later in the year, but it's pretty safe to do it a few times a year without any repercussions. If you're really concerned about it, the best thing to do is just get your level tested to determine whether or not you need to have it done. Well, let's keep going down on the left. Let's see, I think I answered that. If you're taking, Len's asking should you take your vitamin D all at once? No, you don't have to take it all at once. I mean, you can take it all at once. You don't have to split like 50,000 units if you're doing a big load. You could take all 50,000 in one dose. Same thing if you're taking 8 or 10,000 a day or 6,000 a day. If it's emulsified, if it follows that formulation, you can take it all at once. Again, you're going to get really solid absorption even giving it all in the same dose. The key, though, is to get it in you each day. Again, if you're trying to keep it up day in and day out. Okay, let's keep going down on that side. If you've got a history of kidney stones, understand that vitamin D doesn't necessarily increase your risk for the development of a kidney stone. Most kidney stones, again, for most, are what are called calcium oxalate stones, and they can form for a number of different reasons. Sometimes they form because of lack of fluid or dehydration. Sometimes they form because of high oxalate diets. Sometimes they can form because of a chronic yeast overgrowth. I mean, there are vitamin B6 deficiencies. There are a lot of different ways that people can start to develop kidney stones, but taking vitamin D is typically not one of them unless that vitamin D is pushing your serum calcium way high. Again, that's something you can ask your doctor to monitor. Okay, let's see. Sluggish gallbladder. A little off topic, but one of the best things you can do is go on the no grain, no pain diet. If your gallbladder's not doing well with you, no grain, no pain. I've seen a lot of gallbladders be saved from surgery when people apply the no grain, no pain diet. So that would be kind of a first line of defense that you could do very easily. I don't see a question in that. Let's go down a little bit. So Betty's saying, I think this question was alluding to what I was talking about earlier with the microbiome. If you do a round of antibiotics with a diverticulitis event, you'd need a good 14 days of high levels of probiotics after would be my recommendation to support you in that. And so that would be a bottle of ultrabiotic defense is a 14-day supply. So that hopefully that answers your question. Liquid versus pills versus capsule on the vitamin D. Again, emulsified liquid is premium, best of the best. Pills is the best when you're taking high levels. So if you're doing like like the loading, that's why I have a product called Ultra D3, which it's a small bottle. There's only a few pills in it, and it's designed for families that just want to do the load. And so that when you're taking it in that quantity of a dose, it's perfectly fine to do it that way. But if you're trying to maintain vitamin D levels over the long haul from a day-to-day use perspective, I do recommend an emulsified liquid as the go-to. Yeah, boy, Shauna, that's a very unique question. How many units of vitamin D daily to maintain 80 to 100 for a 70-year-old with multiple sclerosis and Hashimoto's? Hard to say. I mean, remember that autoimmune disease plays a role in vitamin D status. So, depends on how active your autoimmunity is. I mean, I've seen, again, if you're trying to maintain it, probably somewhere between 6 and 10,000, as a rough estimation based on my prior experiences. That being said, you should really work with your doctors and have that level tested so that you can kind of know, because I'm just throwing out a number based on experience, but that doesn't mean that number would work for you. What if the doctor gave you D2 in a 10,000 international unit dose? What if? I don't know. What if? You can take it or not. It's between you and your doctor. But again, I personally prefer cholecalciferol, not ergocalciferol. That being said, a lot of doctors prescribe K or vitamin D2 as opposed to vitamin D3. I don't understand why, because it's not the active version of vitamin D. I like to prescribe the active so that we know that the body is recognizing it and capable of using it effectively. Yeah, so Clyde is asking about vitamin D as an antidepressant. Vitamin D is not an antidepressant. Vitamin D deficiency can cause depression, but that doesn't make vitamin D an antidepressant. Vitamin D helps when somebody is depressed because they have low vitamin D. Vitamin D can correct that depression, but it's not an antidepressant. Not all people with depression are going to have that depression because of low vitamin D. So I don't want to make vitamin D sound like it's supposed to be a cure-all for depression, because that's not the case. But there is this thing called seasonal affective disorder, which is during the harsh winter months, the further north you live, depression sets in. Why? Why does it set in? Mostly because people don't get adequate sunshine and they don't get adequate vitamin D along with that. Word girl, with supplementation of vitamin D3 help lower blood pressure? Possibly. Vitamin D deficiency can cause elevations in blood pressure, but not all elevations in blood pressure are caused by vitamin D deficiency. So it depends on the person. Let's see. Let's scroll down on the left. And the questions are long. I think I answered the one about, so anxiety and somebody's asking whether vitamin D is involved in anxiety. It can be. Anxiety and depression, yes, vitamin D can affect your mood, no doubt about it. Vitamin D deficiency can tend to lead toward higher anxiety and also depression. There's studies that show both, and I've seen that be the case with my nutrition clients. Okay, answered that one. Let's see, I got one here. Ken's asking, vitamins D, magnesium, zinc, and C, can these be taken together, or should certain ones be taken at different times during the day due to absorption interference? So they can all be taken together, Ken. You can take the D with the magnesium and the zinc and the C all together. But if you're taking higher levels, so let's say, for example, you're trying to take 600 milligrams of magnesium, 75 milligrams of zinc, and 5 grams of vitamin C plus 10,000 units of vitamin D. What you want to do with those is you want to break up. You don't want to take 600 milligrams of magnesium at the same time. Magnesium, a good amount of magnesium to take in kind of a single oral bolus dose would be anywhere from 1 to 200 milligrams. If you start getting over that, it might cause water pulling into your bowel and lead to some loose bowel. Same thing with vitamin C. It's best to take it in gram doses. You start getting into that 2-gram range, it can cause gas, bloating, and water pulling into your GI tract. And then zinc, it's best to take that at around a 25 milligram dose and split it out over the course of the day if you want to get more than that. Because zinc, too much of zinc can cause nausea. It's one of those things where when you take that zinc, you definitely want to take it with food. Now, all those things can be taken together. I would recommend that anybody taking them all together simultaneously would, again, take that with food to kind of prevent any type of issue. But yeah, you can. They can all be used in the same, at the same meal. If you want to take, all 4 at the same time and after a meal, that's fine. Just again, split the dose over the course of the day of all of them simultaneously, so that you don't get any bowel issues that might evolve from that. Nick asks, there's a local IV clinic offering immunity shot with vitamin C, zinc, and glutathione, and a second vitamin D shot. Is it worth it? Maybe. I would look at, my question would be for that local clinic, that doctor would be, what are the additives, what are the adjuvant ingredients in that shot, right? And are they good for me or are they not? Because you don't need a shot. You can take these things orally. Remember, your body is designed to extrapolate these nutrients orally. And unless you're really super sick or have a major inflammatory gut issue where you're not digesting and absorbing nutrients very well, then I find that IVs and shots are not always necessary in people, although, it might be helpful. I'm not opposed to it, but again, ask about the adjuvants. I think I answered that one. Okay. Well, it looks like we're down to the wire anyway, and there's more questions than what I have time to get into tonight. Look, if I didn't get to your question tonight, make sure you get in earlier when we start the show at 6 p.m. Central Standard Time. You're always welcome. You can join us in the waiting room before the show begins and pump your question in early. That way, it's first come, first served. But I want to say thank you for spending your Monday night with me. Thank you for letting me rant a little bit tonight. And I hope you took something away. I hope the message that you took away tonight is, look, mainstream medicine promotes unhealthy behaviors in the guise or the sake of making you think you're going to achieve greater health. And the outcome of this past 2020 has been the behaviors that have been recommended have led to arguably a deficiency in one of the most key nutrients that can actually protect your body from viral infections. And the research is now showing that. It's now playing out beautifully to that tune. So what can you do to protect yourself? Simple. Get plenty of sleep, eat well, exercise, get good sunshine when the weather permits it. It's harder to do in winter, but when the weather permits it, try to get out there and get sunshine. And then lastly, have your vitamin D levels checked. Look, if they're low, get them up there. That's one of the best ways to protect yourself. We're seeing that play out in the research. We're seeing that play out in clinical trials. So I wish you excellent health. I hope you have a fantastic week. We'll see you next Monday for another episode of Pick Dr. Osborne's Brain. Take care. Hey, if you've got a functional medicine or health question that you'd like me to answer for you, make sure you send me an email, glutenology@gmail.com, and we'll do our best to create a video answer just for you. Have a great day.